Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast with Benji Nice, and very G'd up for our first World Tour race recap of the season, the UAE Tour Stage 1, and it was on paper going to be a bunch sprint. We'll get into what happened and why that did not eventuate in a second. But this podcast is brought to you by our show partner, Le Col. They produce performance cycling apparel. They're back with us for the entirety of the 2021 year, for all the Grand Tours, all the World Tour and Women's World Tour races. They got some big announcements coming out, and maybe, well, not maybe, there will be some big names coming on as guests for the podcast in the classics and races coming up. But we'll announce that in due course. If you want to check them out now, you can see them at www.lecol.cc. Also, another note of housekeeping, because the UAE Tour is actually on at a humane time for me, I'll put in a reasonable amount of efforts for the YouTube video for this podcast. So this is a podcast. That is first and foremost. The YouTube is secondary for people who like to watch there. But that being said, on the YouTube video we put up when we're talking about it, the profile of the stage, we also have a license agreement now with Corvos, the photography agency. So there'll be photos licensed that we will show of the stage, and the amount we show will vary depending on the stage. But just to let you know that, in case it's not a blank screen anymore. It's actually catered for YouTube. It also has our heads. But now onto the stage, Benji. What would the profile look like? And there weren't many hills in it.
Yeah, to be honest, it's a very, very flat terrain. It started a bit above sea level, but it went down and down, and eventually just the last 100 kilometers are like proper flat, but honestly, like the part before that is basically flat as well. So 176 kilometers between Al Dhafra Castle and Al Mirfa. This is one of those flat stages we said that would most likely end up in a mass sprint. We also mentioned in the preview that sometimes wind happens on these kind of stages, and well, oh boy, today that was definitely on the menu because, yeah, quite simply, we started off and I was laying in bed. It was morning. I was like, oh, UAE Tour is up today.
You were all asleep in Europe, so people will need us to tell them what happened. So this was, I thought I was watching on GCN Race Pass, but the coverage started at 8:45 p.m. Brisbane time. I didn't realise that there was actual coverage before that feed started. And in UAE Tour, what seems to happen is they can't sell or don't sell the first 2 hours of each stage. And I get that. Broadcasters, if they're buying it on a per hour basis, it's not economical to buy 2 hours of pancake flat race live footage at 6 a.m. European time, or whatever time it was in Benji land. So it was only, but it is visible if you go onto the Dubai Sports Authority webpage legally. You can, no VPN required. I watched because I saw on La Flamme Rouge Twitter, I was just having a nice meal, drinking some water, and I saw that 200 meters into the race there was crosswind chaos and massive echelons everywhere, and he posted a photo that got me very, very excited. So I jumped on, and yeah, 176k stage, 1k in echelons. I think Pogacar was in group 1. I think Yates is really good in crosswinds, but Kuss and Higuita were the big ones, Benji. They struggled in the crosswinds. Ineos were the architects of it. Ghana, I think some statistics showed he did like 60 k's an hour for 15 minutes. But
crazy.
Am I wrong in thinking Higuita was okay in crosswinds? Why did I have that impression in my mind? Is he done okay at Paris-Nice or something?
Yes, Paris-Nice last year was the race that we had those echelons where Bernal also played a role into in the first or second stage, the one Garcia Cortina won. And eventually, like, Higuita was in that group and actually survived those crosswinds pretty nicely. So he obviously doesn't have the body type for it. The man's 57 kilos, and with a bit of wind, he flies off the bike. But last year was good at it, and this year, it started off, and he just dropped from group to group every single time. And at the start, it looked like he was able to hang on with the first two groups, but he just kept falling through. And this is the kind of stage where when an echelon happens early on in the stage, you're like, oh, it's all going to come together. But the problem is, basically everything is sand and open terrain in the UAE Tour. So the only moments that it can come together is if they pass a small town or a small city. But after that, it's again desert. So it's very difficult for those groups to come back and to sustain together, because every single time it would go through a village, you would see the groups come together a bit, and then once it's through that village, it opens up again. And it's really cool to see a stage like that, because quite simply, I had a discussion last night with somebody that said, oh, these stages are boring, the first 98% is flat. Honestly, like, I love these kind of stages because it's either echelons or it's a mass sprint with the best sprinters against each other. We mentioned it on the preview. So, yeah. Anyway, continue onwards. Echelons.
Well, yeah, today was a banger. So it's easy to describe who was not in the first group. There was a group of like 60 in the front group eventually after the initial chaos. But yeah, it was Kuss and Higuita that were main riders missing. I'm not sure where Buchmann was, but yeah, Kuss was struggling as well in the crosswinds. I remember, if you go back and look at stage 7 in the Tour last year, I've never seen his face in more pain. His face has never looked like that in a mountain before. On that crosswind stage last year in the Tour, he was struggling too. So maybe that is, well, I think that is a weakness for him as well. But it did all come back together. Long stage, eventually everyone sort of chilled out. And then they were coming in to, well, they took a feed, all chill. And this is what happens with echelon stages. Then there was an intermediate sprint, about 112, 115 Ks left in the stage at Habsan Camp. Don't know where that is. Middle of the desert somewhere. That's where it looked like. But 4Ks into that sprint, nothing really happening. Everyone's chilling. And then all of a sudden, Quick-Step appear. And I would just like to play a little excerpt from the preview we put up a couple of days ago about what I thought Quick-Step would do for Joao Almeida, just to pat myself on the back. Yeah, I think Almeida, it suits him really well. And you know what, Benji? You know why I think it suits him? It's because of all the intermediate sprints. He's got a strong flat sprint train like Kaiser, Cadno, Murku, Archbold to go after those extra seconds if he needs to. As I have editorial control of this podcast, I'm allowed to be a little self-congratulatory. But the point was, Quick-Step were using the intermediate sprints correctly as a means to get Almeida some seconds in case he loses them on the climbs coming up on stages 3 and 5. And they hit it really hard. Everyone was caught napping pretty much. They even had, the only rider there, Benji, was Omer Goldstein, right? From ISU, the national champion for Israel, found himself in the middle of a Quick-Step train of maybe 5 riders, Archbold, Cataneo, Masnada, and Almeida, Murku. And Almeida got the 3 seconds at the intermediate sprint, but then Quick-Step just kept rolling it. Everyone started panicking. Yates got across, the only Ineos rider to get across. Pogacar, I think Bjerg bridged him across, Benji, with Gaviria. Who else? Who were the other big names that made this split?
I think the main focus for the day itself, and not the GC, would be that there are sprinters up there. And Gaviria was up there also with the likes of Bjerg and also Richese. Obviously, Pogacar is not going to ride for Gaviria today. That's obvious. And then Viviani was there with one teammate. We had David Dekker with the likes of Chris Harper. Yes, Kenneth Van Bilzen was the other Cofidis rider. I think those are the main sprinters that were there. Obviously, you would think
MVP.
that... Oh, yeah. Wow. Forgot about that, man. Yeah, Van der Poel was there as well.
This is the unconscious Belgian bias against Dutch riders. Not even mentioning Van der Poel.
I actually like Van der Poel more than Van Aert, and that's probably a crime to say that here live. But okay. I think he was there as well with a teammate. Johnny Vermeers, also a good Belgian rider. Yeah.
Roy Jans. There are a couple of Alpecin guys there. They were well represented. So, classic crosswinds. Doesn't matter if it's in, where are you, Benji? Like in Flanders on the coast. Pana. Doesn't matter if it's in Pana or in the middle of the UAE. Crosswinds, Alpecin, and De Koning are good. So it was the same sort of riders you'd expect there. And pretty large group. And it was interesting because you had the GC guys. Well, it's interesting in that you had Quick-Step, Benji, dropping Bennett, their sprinter, on a quote-unquote sprint stage. They were so committed to riding for Almeida on GC. I think the correct decision, by the way, that they didn't. Bennett was gone. Ewan was gone. He was on the wrong side of the split. Ackerman was gone. It was interesting to me, Benji, that they didn't contest the intermediate sprint because they were all at the back. Were you watching? I saw Ewan was chatting at the back of the peloton. They didn't even make an effort to move up to the front of the peloton before the intermediate sprint. Buchmann missed it. Froome missed it. Who were the other GC losers on the day? Lushenko missed it as well. But again, the 3 GC favourites did make it. Almeida, Yates and Pogačar. Do you think Yates making it is a coincidence, or do you think he is legit good in crosswinds?
I think he's good at the inside of it. He's good at noticing when a gap could form and try to save that just in time.
Yeah.
And it might have been on the brink today, because if he waited a little longer, then it would have been gone.
Yeah.
And the same with Pogačar and Bjerg. So very good move, very decisive move. The moment that nobody really expects it, just after the intermediate sprint, that people are like, oh, they're just going to fall back to the group. No, it doesn't surprise me that Ewan is not contesting these intermediate sprints. Like, if you're Ewan, you're going for stage wins, not for the points classification in the OE Tour, to be honest. That's just my opinion about it. I think that I do kind of am surprised that so many people keep getting surprised by the Koenig pulling something like these off. But on the other end, you've got an entire stage where it can happen. And that's probably the issue, because you need to be aware every single second in this UAE Tour, because it can happen everywhere.
Well, that's the thing. The Koenig smartly are like, well, we've already made this massive 1,500 metre effort to put everyone in the gutter to get Almeida these intermediate sprint points. Now we just have to keep riding. Then other strong riders got across. Gaviria, who else was there? Yeah, NVDP and Alpecin. So now you got Alpecin and De Koenig with their leaders. That's going to be very hard to bring back. So even though the group really... Oh, and David Decker with maybe that group. We were hyping him up a lot, I think, on the preview podcast. The Jumbo-Visma rider, his first World Tour race there with Chris Harper, who did well at the Australian National Champs. But yeah, once they got into that group, 90 seconds. It went to 90 seconds, the gap, and it hung there for ages and ages. The group behind was working like consistently, but not ferociously. And the big issue was Ineos did not help because Yates was there. And they got Ganna, who could have probably put 40 seconds into that on his own in 10 minutes if he really cared to, but Ineos didn't help. And eventually, the peloton just gave up. I think if you look at the map overhead, they sort of went in a clockwise fashion towards the finish, so that they did change direction, and they did a right-hand turn, I think, I don't know, maybe with 70 Ks to go, 60 Ks to go. I thought maybe, okay, well, if the wind changes here, they work, they'll bring the gap. They brought 10 seconds into it, and then nothing happened. And with crosswind stages, if the gap keeps hovering at the same time, eventually the chase group will get tired and give up, and then that happened, and it blew out to like 3-4 minutes. What about Froome, Benji? He obviously missed the first split, but then he was slipping back groups. Did that concern you, or do you think if you're him, what does it matter if you finish in Group 2 or Group 4?
I wouldn't really be concerned regarding Froome, because, well, dropping from group to group is not really an amazing thing to see. But on the other hand, I don't really think it's going to influence like my feelings surrounding him. He said a few days ago, 2 days ago, just after our preview podcast, that he's riding for Hermans here in the UAE Tour on the mountain stages. So I don't really care what he's doing on a flat stage per se, as long as he's not like alone off the back like Aru did in the Tour de France, because that would be the most worrying thing. Dropping from group to group is perhaps just saving energy. So you can't know it. It's impossible to guess whether it's a signal of having a bad form or anything, or if it's just him not caring enough, because it looked like he was laughing throughout the stage with some Ineos people. So yeah,
true.
Should be fine, I think.
So they did one lap of the finish line for the second intermediate sprint. There, Quickstep went for Almeida again in this reduced group. Pogačar contested that sprint and I think got second. Murku tried to take seconds away. So Almeida gained another second on Pogačar, taking his lead to 4 seconds there by the second intermediate sprint. As I said, this group was gone, and now we turned our attentions to who was going to win the stage. Are Quickstep going to focus on getting Almeida in another split? I thought Quickstep might try and split it again, but I think they were quite tight at that point. Remember, they have Archbold, Cataneo, I think Masnada, Almeida, and Murku. So very strong group. Alpecin have multiple riders, as well as MVDP, not a bad rider. Decker. So then the sprinters, if it comes down to a sprint, Gaviria, Decker, Viviani, who Benji actually did say to his credit, maybe offline, he said it stronger to me before we recorded the preview that he thought Viviani would actually do better at UAE, Viviani and MVDP. So that was going to be, and it wasn't the quick step guys we normally see rolling attacks like Askren, Lampard, Seneschal. It was kind of the B team, but they're still so good, so professional. But yeah, the last 10Ks, Benji, did you think it was coming down to a bunch sprint? Were you surprised that Quickstep started rolling attacks that early? And yeah, how did you think it would play out?
Well, we have a few sprinters up there. You mentioned it. And obviously, the Koenig had the number amount. They had the advantage of having a lot of riders. But I also thought, well, they've got the team to attack here. So I kind of was expecting some kind of attacks because we know that if there's a group of like 20 people left with one domestique here, one domestique there, for example, Bjerg at UAE, for example, Van Bilzen at Viviani's team, at Cofidis, and Chris Harper for David Decker, for example, Johnny Vermeers for Van der Poel, those are all one rider for someone. Richese ain't going to pedal at the front of the peloton because he's the lead out for Gaviria, and also the Koenig squad obviously won't do anything if they attack. So at a certain point, they were all sitting in like second, third, and fourth position, the Koenig. And there was an attack just on a position that I perhaps did not anticipate it yet. With 8 kilometers to go, I thought he would attack a bit later. And that was a pretty obvious attack. Joao Almeida. And I found that a very, very good attack. But the problem is, it was a tiny bit too early, I think. And we saw a direct response from Nelson Paulus, I think. We also had Johnny Vermeers trying to close it down. And the thing is, like, you're laughing, and I totally get it, because Nelson Paulus is up there alone. He has no teammate there, so he's basically YOLOing every attack, because why the hell not? And he just closed that gap down together with Johnny Vermeers and Almeida. There was one more rider in the wheel there. I don't really know who it was, to be honest. I seem to remember that at certain point Gaviria moved up and actually moved into an attack in a four-man group. And I noticed that in that group that obviously, once they noticed the Gaviria is at the back, they're not going to pace. But also Johnny Vermeer was not pacing much because Van der Poel was in the group behind. So there was only like Nelson Paulus, who had no real thing to lose on that stage, and Almeida, who wanted to get seconds for GC. They were pacing up there. And they didn't really bother about the stage win because Pogacar was behind for Almeida. So he was down to keep on pacing. But behind, we saw one rider from UAE move to the front and just smash it at the front, right?
Yeah, it was Bjerg, I think. But that kind of cooked him a little bit. I mean, Nelson Paulus made it his lifelong goal today to make sure that first attack from Quickstep did not work. And then he flicked Vermeers through, and then was really confused why Gianni Vermeers wouldn't pace despite having Van der Poel behind, which was very amusing. If you grinded our Tour de France pods last year, remember we were maybe a little correctly critical of Nelson Paulus' tactics in breakaways when he's got very, very strong legs, but sometimes wastes those legs a bit Marc Soler-like. So then there was a second attack from Quickstep. I can't remember if it was Masnada or who it was.
I think it was Archibald.
Archibald maybe got brought back pretty quickly, but you could see it like took a little bit longer. It wasn't like an immediate snap. Bjerg was getting tired. He'd been doing a lot of work all day. Then the next attack was the decisive one. Cataneo, he attacked in the Giro, right, Benji, and he got a really big gap late stage in the Giro, I think, last year. Cataneo, he was at Androni for a long time, moved to Quickstep quite late, at like 27, 28 years old, I think. More of a break guy. In the mould of Lampard, not as good, obviously, compared to the sprinty guys like Archibald, Murku, and he got this was a proper gap now, and you could see whoever was the UAE rider on the front, they flicked through, and they flicked through to a wall of 3 blue riders, Quick-step blocking, and at that point you're like, well, this 3-second gap is going to become 13 seconds very quickly, and I think it was Pogacar tried to bridge at one point, Benji. He got a little way in. I thought Cataneo was gone for a second there. 2.7 Ks, 13-second gap, UAE tied. Cofidis not helping, Harper not helping for TJV to bring back Cataneo. But I think it was Alpecin Phoenix in conjunction with UAE ate into it. It got to about 6 seconds, and then of all people, I think, oh, what Benji, 2Ks, 1800 to go. Fernando Gaviria takes a flyer, and he attacks out of the group, like gets a proper gap. And I think his mistake, Benji, he bridged to Cattaneo, but he didn't snap off him really easily. So then Cattaneo was still strong enough to sit on Gaviria, and it kind of messed up Gaviria's rhythm, who was looking really, really strong. And then, but I thought Gaviria was going to go right past him. But this was looking really, really good for Alpecin Phoenix. They've had Quickstep roll a lot of their punches, ruin their lead out for Mørkøv. They've had Gaviria, probably the quickest man in the group, now burn himself. So they just got to worry about Viviani, who's at the back of the group, and Decker. And I mean, the final sprint was a little bit messy thanks to Quickstep. Quickstep then put, I think, second last man at the front. They then tried to attack with Archbold. This is now in the last 600 meters. Mørkøv then tried to block really viciously anyone trying to follow Archbold's wheel. MVDP had to veer out wildly to the left. Pretty standard Quickstep tactic. They like to do that in the last 600 with that lead-out man and then block anyone. MVDP nearly crashed. He gets onto Archbold's wheel. Mørkøv is then fighting for MVDP's wheel with David Decker, who's followed MVDP to the left-hand side. 400 or 350 meters to go. And they're going around a right-hand bend. Decker fights off Mørkøv. Viviani's to the right-hand side. And then I think MVDP opened up at like 175, 200, and it was all over. No one really looked like they were able to come around him. Decker was right in his wheel. Mørkøv had to go to the right-hand side the long way around. Viviani tried to get Decker off MVDP's wheel, but he wasn't going quick enough. And yeah, Van der Poel won by a bike length. Pretty convincing win from him straight out of the CX season. But his sprint, Benji, I mean, impressive as it was, you wanted to talk about, he went from the center of the road to the right-hand side. Like, he clearly deviated. And people have been asking you directly on Twitter, why should he not be disqualified? So maybe you want to clear that up, as well as giving your thoughts on the finale in due course.
Yeah, so basically the thing about this final is that, like you mentioned, there's this right-hand corner with about 90, well, I think like 200 to 300 meters to go. There's this right-hand corner, 90 degrees corner. And Archbold took that widely before going into it. Viviani was on the wheel of Archbold, if I recall correctly, and then Van der Poel was behind Viviani there as well, with Decker in the wheel of Van der Poel. So that's how they went into the corner first. Now, Van der Poel is in third position there. He obviously needs to get past people to do something there. And Archbold is not the sprinter. Mørkøv is a sprinter who is, I think, fifth position at that point, just behind Decker. Yeah. And the moment the sprint starts, we see that Archbold goes a bit to the right and allows Van der Poel to sprint straight at the start. Viviani has to go around Archbold on the right to try and take the right-hand barrier as his lane. Yeah, the rule's pretty important on that part. But Viviani was sprinting on the right, Van der Poel was sprinting in the middle, and Van der Poel had Decker in the wheel, who was obviously just benefiting from the draft of Van der Poel in that sprint. Van der Poel knows that and is like, what if I just swing in front of Viviani, then the people in my wheel are having to ride without a draft, which obviously is less beneficial. And he does that, but he does that in a pretty good way, in the sense that he does that the moment that he cannot endanger Viviani. And that is where the rule is specific. The rule is specific that you can deviate as long as you don't endanger anybody. As the rule says, in doing so, endangering someone. And that is why in this situation, Van der Poel cannot deserve a penalty, because, well, quite simply, he didn't endanger anyone doing so. Obviously, danger is subjective. That's why we always talk about this rule, because, well, it's a fine line.
Yeah, if he makes his calculation wrong, he could chop Viviani, but he was past Viviani. I'd argue Viviani's move was more dangerous, Benji. He sees MVDP's wheel coming. He moves off the right-hand barrier and he swings into Decker, trying to take him off MVDP's wheel. And I think he was fortunate that Decker was coming out of MVDP's slipstream to try and open up his sprint. So fortunate in that sense for Dekker. But yeah, it's Benji's right. He didn't really endanger anyone. That's why it's not a problem. Here's the full stage results though. Mathieu van der Poel first, David Dekker second. Fantastic result for Dekker. Dutch 1-2. I mean, first World Tour race, coming second in a hard stage like that in echelons all day. Really impressive for Dekker. Mørkøv third. Lapinge fourth, the Latvian for Trek Segafredo, a nice result for him. Viviani fifth. Pogačar sixth, same time as all the other sprinters. Roux seventh, Harper eighth, Almeida ninth, Masnada 10th. Now, I saw in some provisional results that Pogačar had been credited with some seconds, or had been given a 3-second advantage on Almeida in the finale. So that actually affects the GC a little bit. So Van der Poel's leading GC 4 seconds ahead of Dekker, 6 seconds ahead of Mørkøv, 7 seconds ahead of Almeida. Almeida, who did have 4 bonus seconds before the finale on Pogačar, had lost 3, so he's only 1 second ahead of Pogačar, who's 5th. Yates, I think, is 3 or 4 seconds behind Almeida. I think maybe even more because of bonus seconds. Might be 5 or 6 seconds behind Almeida. So, professional, good work from Quick-Step today. I think they would have liked a little bit more, at least to be in the first or second places in the stage. And also, I think they would have liked more than a second on Pogačar. I think they did a lot of work to only have 1 second on him. But I think Pogačar's the big winner of the day, Benji. He's lost 1 second. He's made GC group. He's not had to work as hard as Almeida, I don't think, who had to attack as well. I think, yeah, it was really good for Pogačar today. But what were your standout or highlights from today?
I think both the fact that, well, the 3 riders we named as our top 3 are in the first echelon, so that's still good for GC.
We're so smart.
I was very much anticipating a sprint for Dekker, and this situation was ideal. David Dekker is not the best sprinter when it comes to speed, but he is the classics type of rider. So in echelon type business, he can actually stay up there in an echelon, and we saw that today. Yeah. I was kind of surprised that Chris Harper was also able to do that, but props on that from that man. I think that when it comes to his sprint by David Dekker, there's 2 things we can notice. I think in one of your videos about him a year and a half ago, you mentioned that his sprint is good, but he cannot stay out of the saddle for like X amount of seconds, and that's a bit of a weakness for him in the sprint, right? Is that the logic you had there?
So when you look at Van der Poel, Ackermann, Ewan, Bennett, when they're on form, winning sprints, they are able to knock out 15 seconds out of the saddle fully sprinting when they need to. And I think he's struggling to do that. You could see he was struggling to get out of the saddle when he was trying to. He couldn't stand up when he's trying to get out of the wheel of Van der Poel. And yeah, it's just something he's going to have to work on. I think his seated power is excellent. And I think that's great for closing a gap in when echelons are happening. Being able to just stay in the saddle and just mash for 20 seconds is something he is already really good at. But yeah, that final sprint, I think is something he's going to be working on. But still, we're nitpicking. Second to MVP.
I think that one thing I did notice when it comes to Dekker is that his initial positioning in the sprint definitely decided some part of that, because with about 500, 600 meters to go, he was not in the first like 8, 9 of that group, and he had to move up one rider by rider to move up. And at a certain point, he had a first sprint already with like 400 meters to go to get past a few people to get into a position in the wheel of Van der Poel. So I think that perhaps we're looking too much at the final sprint here, and I think that perhaps Dekker could have done more if he didn't have to ride an extra sprint before that to get into the position. But we can say all we want about that sprint, but the entire day at this tempo, everybody's got to have suffered at least at one point. So impressive stage, top start to the season.
He also told Mørkøv to get the fuck off Mathieu van der Poel's wheel. He gave him the big don't argue with 2:50 to go. Mørkøv was trying to slip onto van der Poel's wheel. Dekker, big guy by the way, he's young but he's big. He gave him a big hip and said, nah, this is my wheel. And Mørkøv couldn't do anything. He had to change course, go right, and cost him positioning in the sprint. I love to see it. not getting bullied early on, and I don't think he will be. Not the type of guy he is. So I think Decker and Van der Poel are friends as well. I'm not sure. I got sources telling me that, even though it's probably public information. But let's look at stage tomorrow, Benji. Stage 2. It's the ITT from Al Hudayrat Island. 13 Ks, very twisty, lots of turns. But a hot take for you, Benji. I think Filippo Ganna's the favourite and probably going to win.
Whoa!
That's why everyone. Yeah, I know. That's why everyone tunes into the podcast. Listen to great analysis like that. But seriously, the GC actually hasn't changed too much. We should mention Caruso top 10 hype. Caruso made the front group, and he crashed, but he got, I think, given the same time. But the 3 favourites, Benji, Yates, Almeida, Pogacar, they were our 3 favourites. I think they were the favourites, the top 3 in the betting market. So it really hasn't changed too much. But yeah, judging on their form today, I guess, does that change your view on how they might go in the TT tomorrow? It does. I didn't really see anything to change my view.
It confirms, I think. It confirms that all 3 are in good form at the start here, and I think that Almeida's leader after tomorrow's stage.
Leader of the race?
Yep.
Nah, Van der Poel.
Nah, I don't think so.
Okay, I think Van der Poel is going to do pretty well tomorrow.
I get your point, though, because, Van der Poel's Big Bang ITT was good, and that 13-kilometer ITT should technically really fit him. So it's going to be close. I think
is he going to try?
Nice
he has to try
here. He has to try. Come on.
Because before the race, he said he was not going to try. I don't think
he's going to try.
He has to try. His leader's jersey now. Yeah, he has to try to defend it. I think. I don't know. I actually don't even. I just want to disagree with you. So I think. Okay, Mathieu Van der Poel to beat Almeida and keep the jersey tomorrow. Benji's going against me. But anything else, Benji? I'm going to go watch the last stage of Old Var. Should be a pretty good one. They're going up to Madone in a second. Make sure to hit us up on Twitter or wherever, really, in the comments of the YouTube video, letting us know what you thought of this stage. I thought it was a banger, an actual stage for the ages. I'll remember this stage for a long time because of how hard it was and the crosswinds and how many quality riders missed that first group. But I'm stoked to be doing these recaps already. I missed them last year, and I'm happy to be doing them at a good time. But yeah, anything else to watch out for in the ITT tomorrow, Benji? A sneaky top 5 who's not a GC guy and not named Filippo Ganna.
A sneaky top 5. I'm gonna go for a very, very sneaky top. Top 8. This is not gonna happen. I had Brandon Smith Rivera, but no. That was not gonna happen. I think that we can expect a decent time trial by. You said Bissiger, right?
Yeah, Bissiger.
I believe in that, but
he must get top 3.
It's really hard to guess who can get a top 5. Someone like Brentler or Dowsett require a longer prologue to really do it. Tanfield, Hansen, those kind of riders can perform.
Chris Harper came 4th in Australian Champs. He's in good form. He went well at the road race. Maybe top 10, probably not.
Nikias Arndt. Sneaky top 5.
Yeah, okay. The thing I'm really going to be focused on is Sepp Kuss. This is the first TT that Sepp Kuss is doing fully for himself as GC leader. I don't know what is he going for stages now, Benji? It's kind of thrown that out the window. Is he just going to go for stages, given he's lost 4 minutes, 3.5 minutes on Pogacar?
Yeah, why not? But triple half feet.
He should still do the TT full, so they have a baseline, I think. Yep. So I'll be watching that closely. Thanks to Lacole for supporting the podcast. Check them out at www.lacole.cc, and we'll see you tomorrow with our Stage 2 ITT recap. Ciao.